Hey, welcome back to this week's Sidebar. Thanks a lot for being here. I appreciate it. Thanks for your support. As always, it means a lot to us and helps us keep this going and helps, keep victims, their families in the front awareness. So today, especially apropos because we just finished recording, it'll be out soon, episode 23, first episode of season 3, about the first murder that my partner Sam Anto and I worked on as lead detectives. Was a murder of a 6-year-old boy named Allen Kalfus. It's a tough case. It's a tough case not to solve so much, but just in terms of, the stress of dealing with the death of a child and having to work a case like that. So today I'm going to go through that a little bit and talk about those things that affect you and can affect you as a homicide detective and the stress level and how to deal with it. So everybody by now is familiar with post-traumatic stress syndrome, whatever. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not trying to give advice here. This is just a discussion of what the life is like and how to deal with it. So, first of all, I think it's probably easy to surmise that, stress of being a homicide detective can be really high in a lot of ways. You see a lot of ugly shit. You deal with some really bad people. You deal with some really good people who've been, traumatized. You have to knock on a lot of doors, tell people that, someone they love and care about is never coming home again. You do a lot of that. And it is the job. And, I love doing the job. And most of the people I worked with did. And there are a lot of stressful jobs in this world. In fact, just trying to pay the bills can be stressful for anybody, right? But in particular, in high stress environment like that, this is kind of how it shakes out in my experience, in my view. Um, just to hit on my own personal systems a little bit, stress to me was kind of a delayed thing in that, there's an immediate stress, right? Somebody shoots at you and you survive it. The adrenaline dump and that stress is kind of obvious, or may seem obvious. It is, again, it's one of those things. It's not quite like Hollywood, right, where you have these kind of flashbacks and of things. It's more that it just things kind of stick with you. And for me, I had this kind of clinical approach to, and I think a lot of people do in that space where you're dealing with the ugliest thing in the world, the murder of a child, the death of a child, or some, anything incrementally worse that you can imagine you're seeing, and you have to kind of get through it. You can't let yourself too much in the moment, let your emotion take over there. You kind of, even when you're surrounded by other people, sometimes other policemen, other detectives who are having reactions yourself sometimes, you have to kind of back it off. You have to be supportive of the people around you, try and be, empathetic to family members and other people around. But you have to do the job. You have to get the things done that need done. You have to, make sure you get the evidence, all of those things that you're aware of, I'm sure by now. And so you get that done. And for me, it wasn't so much, it wasn't in that moment. Stress would affect me in a very weird way. Like, I would have these cases that were traumatic or incidents that were traumatic, and you get through them and you get what needs to be done. Sometimes that trauma is just the stress of a trial, but whatever it is, you get through it in the moment. But for me, at some time I couldn't name, later in my career and later in my life, I've been able to recognize that, okay, this is going to hit me at some point, right? So kind of prepare myself. Sometimes it was a matter of a few weeks, and sometimes it was a couple of months. It was really hard to articulate backwards where it was coming from. But I would, struggle in my interpersonal relationships. I'd eat like shit. I wouldn't go to the gym, drink too much, maybe. Just do things that were not sleep was probably the biggest thing. And and just struggle, and really hard then to acknowledge in the moment, oh, this is probably related to that really horrible thing I saw or whatever, a couple a couple months ago. And so, you know, I had a really difficult time kind of reeling all of that in. It took me several years to start to figure that out, that pattern. And then once I did, I kind of could articulate in my head, and that made it a bit easier because I'm like, all right, so this is a reaction to this or that, whatever. Um, for me personally, I didn't, for most of that, I didn't seek professional help because I felt like I had the support networks around me to deal with it. Experienced detectives and bosses who knew what they were doing, who would had an open ear for me. Other detectives I work with who were feeling the same, and we could talk through it. Sometimes, very honestly, it was in a bar and it was over beers, but we managed it. Did we manage it well? Nah, not always, but we got through. Later in my life, I did seek out more professional help. And I'll be real honest about that. My first attempts at that didn't go all that great. It wasn't therapist's fault or anything. I think sometimes it wasn't a good fit. Sometimes I just don't think I knew what I was looking for out of it. It just felt like, maybe this will help. I think, kind of my divorce may have caused that. I know that stress was not easy on my family, and that, and although we all remain close now, including my ex-wife, it definitely was played a part in that, but the therapy part of it didn't take for me, really. I just continued to kind of work through it. Later that changed, and I'll get into that a little bit, but stress plays itself out in a lot of ways for a lot of different people, and the end games with it can be pretty ugly. By now, I think everybody knows. If you don't know, I'm telling you, the suicide rate among policemen is significantly higher. The percentages are significantly higher than the average population, and it doesn't mean that there's, again, no crying or blues about that. It is just, I think that the stress level from many different sides as a policeman makes decisions and dealing with stress sometimes more immediate, more difficult, and very frankly, you always are walking around with an answer, albeit the very worst answer, on your side, right? Because you always have a gun around you, and many, most of the policemen that I knew or have known that took their own lives did it with their gun. Not everyone, but most. And so suicide's one part of it. Alcohol abuse is another big factor. It's easy for that to get away. It really is. I mean, kind of all go meet and have a beer after work, and that could lead to several days in a row, and it could really become a problem, become an issue. Again, I'm not a treatment expert, and I'm not saying that every one of us became alcoholics, but if I think that any time that drinking or any substance that you use, even prescriptions, when they become a factor in your life that is negative, it's a problem at some point, right? So, I like to have a glass of wine. I like to have a drink with my friends to this day, but to me, if it's not social and fun, it's not worth doing. The days are long gone, but they were there for me. I have to be honest, where you just wanted to go have a beer after work and just let this stress of the day go, and it did work. Best is not the right framework for that, but it felt most comfortable to be around the people you're working with, to be able to not so much beef or complain or about the work and that, but just to be able to talk about anything and know that the person beside you kind of understood that. Even if you're talking about the Chicago Cubs and how poorly they're playing or how well they're playing, or the White Sox, for my South Side buddies, we worked on the West Side, so we were split. But having those conversations, we understood that there was always more to it, and there was always more. And we didn't necessarily, if we needed to talk about the day, we did. But sometimes it was just knowing you're around people that understood, And over years that kind of changed, and we all got older a little bit. But not always. We always had people in our lives. You know, people we worked with that suicides would come up, and they come out of the blue sometimes, and sometimes it wasn't as much of a surprise in that you knew, like, you didn't. If the signs were there, we'd try to address it or talk to them or get them to talk to somebody or get somebody who's close to them to talk to them. But I don't mean that. I mean, you hear somebody had taken their own life and you think, oh, fuck. But you also knew, maybe they were having financial problems. They were going through a divorce. There were other factors. So it wasn't like the most shocking thing in the world. I guess that's a sad statement about the life. But that's what it is. And then sometimes it was really out of the blue, and that was super painful. In fact, just in the last few years, I had a good friend of mine, a guy I worked with, really great policeman who took his own life. And, he was one of those guys that always seemed to look at the bright side, always seemed to have a smile on his face. Really great marriage, awesome wife. They had retired and live in a place they loved. And, I stayed in touch with him and see him. It wasn't really like we talked every day or every week, but man, it hit me very hard and all of us very hard when we heard that he had taken his own life. And it didn't seem like, wait, not him. You know what I mean? Like, how does that work? And so it's just, I don't know how to describe it exactly. It is insidious. It is difficult to put your finger on, but it's there, and I try and talk about this a lot. We stay in touch with each other. It's kind of our way to stay kind of tethered to safety for each other, that we that kind of network that I have. We all kind of stay in touch, and even my friends outside of police department, it's important, I think, to keep that check in with each other. And there's always a, hey, how you doing? And sometimes it is, it's a rough time, whatever. So you talk through it, or, hey, I've been thinking about this, man. You ever think about it? Yeah, man. And talk through it. And you always end like, well, man, how are you? Like, should I be concerned? Be honest with me. Tell me. And we try and be honest with each other, but that's not 100%, because again, my friend I just talked about, I think we felt like, although, I did hear, that, he was talking about some stress and things near the end with some people that he was more contact with than me. And, but still, I mean, none that were like, boy, I was really concerned, so much. It's tough. So anyway, and during the same time period, I had one of my oldest partners on a job. We were partners in patrol before I made detective, who drank himself to death, quite literally. And I got to be honest with that. I cared a great deal about him, but I wasn't a terrible surprise. I don't think for anybody, no less painful. It kind of seemed like a painful inevitability because we talked with each other and talked with him about his drinking, and he just wasn't taking counsel on it. You know what I mean? He wasn't open to talking about it. He wasn't open to kind of discussing that it was an issue for him. And it did cause him some problems. Could we have done more? I mean, probably you could always have done more. I don't know, I'm not going to kind of beat myself up over that. And it is what it is. But there is no doubt that he went down that slow suicide road. Probably not his intention. Maybe it was, but I don't think so. I just think that it got away from him, and it became part of his daily life that didn't want to acknowledge or didn't want to get out from under. Those are two pretty recent tough cases, but they're there and they illustrate what I'm talking about here. So I don't know. I wanted to just discuss this at this point because talking about Allen Kalfus for Sam Manto and I, it did bring up some emotion. First cases, lead detectives, young 6-year-old victim tortured and killed, basically by his foster mother. Again, not a Sherlock Holmes caper. She's in custody almost immediately. Her story was weak. We knew it. We got her to admit what had happened. But it was more just, dealing with a child and the understanding that this kid had gone into the foster system with 2 or 3 years old, probably never had a peaceful day, on the earth. It sucked. It was a lot to deal with. His autopsy was tough and a lot to deal with. And Sam and I talk about this in the podcast. It'll be out soon. So I thought it was just a good time to kind of walk through this. Didn't give you any answers. I will leave you with this. After I retired in a good space. I knew it was time to go. I was a little bit young, but I don't know, whatever, it just caught up to me. I loved the job. I never wanted to not like it. And I don't know, it didn't seem like there was a lot left to do. There's always, murders in a place like Chicago are like the waves in the ocean. They don't stop, no matter how much you stand in there and try to hold them back. It ain't stopping. And you come to that realization at some point. But, not too long after I retired, a guy that I was fairly close with and knew well was killed in the line of duty. And it was the first time in years where that had happened where I had no control because I'm retired and I'm at home. Always before, even I'm off duty, you go into the office, all right, what can I do? Even if you're going out to canvas on the scene or, whatever it is, if you know him closely, go and talk to his family, whatever it would be, you had something you felt like you were doing. You didn't feel helpless. If the bad guy's out there, go look for the bad guy, whatever. In this case, I'm retired. I could do nothing. I called in and my friends said, hey, can I do anything? They're like, Mike, no, we got it. You're retired. And I paced around my place like a caged animal for a couple of days. And at that point, I decided, okay, I don't have the tools in the toolbox right now to kind of get through this. Not that I was suicidal or, I knew at that point wasn't going to drink because that wasn't going to make anything better. I just knew I was going to be miserable. And so I tried it again, and I lucked out and found a really good therapist, went and talked, and that relationship turned into something that really worked for me. And so is there a stigma attached with that? Not to me. I don't give a shit, man. I'm telling you, I don't care. Is there a stigma? There is. I think, it's hard. It's hard for a lot of people to say, I needed help and I went and got help. I don't care about that. I really don't. I think if somebody sees that as a weakness, that's their issue, not mine. I think for me, it's made me a stronger person, a better person. I wish I had the tools that I have gained with this therapist when I was a younger detective, because frankly, I feel like I'd have been even better at it. I wouldn't have been trying to manage the stress the way I was poorly. And, maybe just been more effective at the job. I'm not a guy that looks back and with regret. My grandmother taught me better than that, but it is what it is. It's a truth in my mind. So, I guess I can leave you with that. I'm not trying to be preaching. There is no preaching with this. I'm no better or worse than anybody else. Well, no better. But it's important. And, for anybody out there, especially coppers that are listening but anybody, things build on each other. That's the way stress works. And try and get ahead of it. Try and see it in yourself. Try and be honest with yourself. Try and look at getting healthy, getting better, getting help, as a strength, as a dedication to the people in your life that care about you, and not as a weakness, you know? So that's all I got. That's enough for that for today. I look forward to getting the episode with the interview with Sam about Allen Kalfus out. That'll be out soon. And again, thank you for the support. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. I'll talk to you soon.